everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. Today we are going to talk about the administration of one very unique president that we had. A guy named Andrew Jackson. Now, Andrew Jackson, when he becomes president, is the polar opposite of all the previous presidents that we had, and it makes for some wild stories in U.S. history. You're going to like this. Let's go ahead and get started. This is going to start in 1828 when a man named Andrew Jackson wins the election. Now, not only does this guy, Andrew Jackson, win the election in 1828, he wins in a wild, huge margin. Massively. Why? Well, let's walk through this and talk about why Andrew Jackson was so popular in 1828. So Andrew Jackson was already well known. Andrew Jackson, if you remember from the War of 1812, at the very end of our last unit, even though America, in pretty much every aspect, clearly lost this war, the War of 1812, since we just stopped fighting and nothing really changed for us, and England left it into the war, America felt like we won. We didn't win like a single battle except for the Battle of New Orleans, which was at the very end of the war. Technically, the war had already been over, but they didn't know that, meaning England didn't know that. We didn't know that. So it gets credit for being a legitimate battle where America is able to push the British out and defend New Orleans from British occupation. The general that was in charge of that battle is Andrew Jackson. So once the war is over, there wasn't a lot of positive to really hang your hat on militarily. Everybody's like, Andrew Jackson, that's our guy, because he basically won the only battle in the War of 1812. So when you're a war hero in a war that America wins, whether we do or not doesn't really matter, as long as America thinks we won it, there is a good chance you have the shot of being the president. This is kind of a ongoing theme we'll see in U.S. history. So Andrew Jackson, he'll try to run for president in 1824. He kind of gets, there's this thing called the corrupt bargain, actually prevents him from becoming the president in 1824, which is more detailed for a more intricate non-single semester overview course of U.S. history. But in 1828, he runs again, and he's going to win huge in 1828. Andrew Jackson is actually the very first Democrat. So the reason Andrew Jackson doesn't join any of the other political parties, the Federalists have already kind of died out here after the Hartford Convention of 1812, who seemed anti-American. The Democratic Republicans are pretty much tied to just Jefferson. They're kind of dying out. You got the Federalists, which, again, we're talking about them dying out. There's not really... There's Whigs, which are a holdover from the English days. There's not a whole lot of political parties to join. So Andrew Jackson creates his own. It's called a Democrat. So Democrats are, at the time, all right, and because as we talk about them throughout this course, understand that present day we have a two-party system, Republicans and Democrats. Typically, northern states today are majority Republican or majority Democrat, and southern states present day are majority Republican. That was the opposite really until the mid-1900s. So the Democrats come out, and the Democrats are southern agriculture, non-industrialist people. Democrats also supported the institution of slavery. That is a pivotal thing to point out here. Andrew Jackson had become a wealthy landowner, like he owned a ton of land because he would take it from Indians after the War of 1812, so he was very rich in owning land. He is a Democrat. This is a political party that he joins. He's the first president that we'll have that will be a Democrat, and he represents the South. So the symbol to present day is the donkey for the Democrats. The reason that is because Andrew Jackson is not a likable person unless you're on his side. The people he ran against, because he's such an abrasive personality, and we're going to talk about that in depth, that they called him a jackass, which is another term for a donkey. Instead of getting offended by this, Andrew Jackson's like, you know what? I like donkeys or whatever. I don't know why he liked this insult. So that he actually made it because they called him a jackass, which is, again, another term for a donkey. He uses that emblem as the official symbol of the Democratic Party. And that's why we still have it today, because that's what Andrew Jackson got called when he ran for president. So in 1828, this is the electoral map. The blue areas are the places that Andrew Jackson won, and he won huge. All right? So Andrew Jackson, 1828, has a mandate. Basically, he won so big that he has overwhelming support by the American people. This is a portrait of Andrew Jackson. Now, the reason Andrew Jackson is so important, and we're going to spend a whole lesson here talking about Andrew Jackson, he is not a politician. He is called King Andrew the First, actually. Which let me jump between those two things, saying he's not a politician too. He's a dictator. Two very different concepts. So let me fill in the blanks there for you. Andrew Jackson is a war hero. Wasn't involved in politics. Isn't a founding father. He's really the first president that we have that didn't write the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. He's the seventh president that we had. All right. He is a man of the people. All the other people we have are these aristocrats, highly educated. They're wealthy. Andrew Jackson is wealthy too. Andrew Jackson's from the South. He's actually from North Carolina. So Andrew Jackson, all right, he is, in the eyes of the people, especially in the South, he's a hardcore redneck just like them. Like, he is a country boy. He is not a well-manicured politician that says all the right things at the right time. All right. For that reason, all right, I'll give you a modern picture. So this is his presidential portrait. It has, in recent history, become popular again for the people who don't, teach history like me. This is a modern picture of Donald Trump in the Oval Office. When Donald Trump became president, he wanted the portrait of Andrew Jackson put in the Oval Office because Donald Trump said, I identify with Andrew Jackson. He's one of the people. All the other politicians hate him because he's going to do what he wants to do. Andrew Jackson is stubborn just like me because he's going to do what he thinks is right, and forget all these politicians that want to be corrupt and all this other stuff. That is exactly who Andrew Jackson was. That is exactly who Donald Trump claimed to be. But the aspect of them not being politicians and coming in and being stubborn and having a direct connection with the people, all of that is true. What I thought was weird about this with Donald Trump doing it is there is clearly some really negative things that Andrew Jackson does while he's the president you probably don't want to be associated with. So I was really surprised that Donald Trump really went with Andrew Jackson because right now, President, at least as of this is being recorded in 2022, Andrew Jackson is on the $20 bill. This might be the most famous place you've ever seen Andrew Jackson. It was on the $20 bill, and there is a movement to actually have him taken off the $20 bill, or at least put on the back of it. And I think Harriet Tubman possibly might be who's replacing it. And you're like, replacing it? Why are they replacing presidents on the money? We're going to get to that at the end of the lesson today. There's some shady stuff that Andrew Jackson did that's really uncool in American history. And as we get further away from his time in office, it's kind of the main event that happens while he is in office. So I'm going to actually save that for the last part of today's lesson. Which, again, that's another reason why when Donald Trump's like saying, hey, I want to be like Andrew Jackson, because Andrew Jackson had overwhelming support by the American people. He did not have support by Congress, because Congress is all politicians. Andrew Jackson, when he got elected, he threw a big kegger at the White House and had all of his buddies who are hardcore rednecks just like him show up at the White House, skeet shooting with the fine china on the front yard of the White House, completely trashing it. They had to move the beer outside. This is the true story. They had to move the beer outside the White House so that Andrew Jackson's friends would stop destroying the house. And they're like crawling out the front windows of the White House to get to the beer on the front lawn. And the rest of the proper politicians, oh my gosh, whatever is this? Andrew Jackson was also very stubborn, and he was proud of this. So presidents, if Congress passes a law, presidents have to sign, or they pass it, president has to sign it into law in order for it to become law. Andrew Jackson vetoed, and presidents can do this. You can veto it if you don't like it, but that had really never been a thing. It was rare for that to happen. Andrew Jackson vetoed like everything Congress passed. This is where he gets the nickname King Andrew I, because he's stubborn and he admits it. In his mind, if it wasn't his idea, it's a bad idea. So anything that gets passed by Congress, he would veto, all right? Andrew Jackson actually vetoes more stuff than the previous 6 presidents combined, all right? Which is every other president we've ever had prior. Andrew Jackson, and it would be like one of these things that Congress would be like, oh, I don't think we should, I don't know, it'd be something ridiculous. We shouldn't kill puppies, and everybody in Congress is like, yes, shouldn't kill puppies, and they'll pass a law, pass it to Andrew Jackson, and Andrew Jackson will get it at his desk and be like, what? What? What if it's a demon puppy or whatever? I don't know what Andrew Jackson's logic would have been sometimes. And he's like, veto it. And he would veto it. And Congress is like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he vetoed it. Now, Congress could override him, but Congress realizes how popular Andrew Jackson is with the public. So they didn't want to actually stand up to Jackson because then it makes them look bad and they could lose re-election. So Andrew Jackson, when he would veto stuff, it was just gone. But then like the next day, Jackson would be like, you know what should be a law? Shouldn't be able to kill puppies. And he'd like make the same law, give it to Congress for them to vote on, and they'd be like, we just tried to pass. And they're like, yeah, I know, he's crazy. Because in Jackson's mind, if it's not his idea, it's a bad idea. Another thing Andrew Jackson does, very different from other presidents, is he starts this idea, the official vocab word, because we like to make things difficult in history, is patronage. But it's usually referred to in history as the spoils system. So it's the same thing. This is where you give political jobs to your friends. This horrified everybody. I say horrified like in quotes. Like I cannot believe he would, all these high positions of power that should go to, well-trained people like Thomas Jefferson, or, like George Washington used Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton. Jackson's like, I went to 3rd grade with you. You want to come be Secretary of Treasury? And Andrew Jackson just appoints all of his friends and people loyal to him to these really high positions of power, regardless if they're competent or not. This is called patronage, or the spoils system. People were horrified that he would do this. This is another reason they call him King Andrew I. The negative term for him was King Andrew I. So what's interesting is, awful as it was, if you see here, pretty much after Jackson opens this Pandora's box, a lot of presidents start doing this afterwards, until late 1800s it gets made illegal and you couldn't do it anymore. But this was Jackson's idea. To the victor goes the spoils, meaning the spoil system. I won the election. I can appoint anybody wherever I want. What's really important to understand about Jackson is, again, he is extremely popular among the American people because he's like one of them. He's not this aristocrat like John Adams or Thomas Jefferson or James Madison or James Monroe or John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, who was actually the president before him. This is a normal guy in their minds. They can identify with, so they love him. The rest of the government's terrified of him because he's very unpredictable. So the question here is, I know we spent quite a bit of time on this, so pause me and answer this. Who was Andrew Jackson, and explain why he was very different from any president we had prior to his election? So pause me, answer that completely, and we'll move on. All right, the Tariff of 1828. So there's a big part of Andrew Jackson, because he's so different from everybody else we've had as a president, that I should point out. Andrew Jackson is not afraid of a fight. When I say that, like a literal, actual fight, you mean like punching people and stuff? Sure, or shooting them. What, Mr. Wagstaff? Yeah, this dude, when he dies of old age, all right, eventually, spoiler alert on that one, he will die having 2 bullets permanently inside him that have healed up from 2 duels that he won. That's right. Dude got shot and still won. That means he like literally murdered other people. But it was a duel back then, which wasn't legal, but it was. We get complicated in the early 1800s, social norms of dueling. He'd been stabbed all the way through with a sword before and had 2 bullets in him. In duels in which people had challenged him, somebody talked trash about his wife, he challenged him to a duel, they shot him, he shot him back, they died, he just lived the rest of his life with a bullet in him. This is the man who's the president, all right? Keep that in mind. He's from the South. The South loves him because the South fully expects who's Andrew Jackson going to look out for? He is going to look out for the South. Well, Andrew Jackson, just like pretty much every president we've ever had, once they become president, they actually genuinely do what they believe in their heart of hearts is what's best for the entire country. Enter the Tariff of 1828. So northern companies were struggling to compete against products being shipped here from England that were actually being sold for less money than the products the North was making. We'll say Kleenexes, all right? If the North is selling Kleenexes for $2 a box across the whole country, and England's sending boxes of Kleenex over here for $1 a box, all right? It hurts the northern companies because they're being undersold by English products, and people would rather buy the English products, therefore not buying the American products, hurting American business. Andrew Jackson says, I want to help you out. Andrew Jackson puts a tariff, a tax on all the stuff coming here from England. By doing so, what he does is all those $1 boxes of Kleenex from England are now $3 boxes of Kleenexes. So the cheapest Kleenexes to buy are now the $2 box of American Kleenexes. Hooray, the northern companies love this because it makes their product now the cheapest ones, and people are starting to buy theirs. Well, the North might have loved it. The South hates it with a passion. The reason the South hates this tariff is because all they know is when they used to go to the store, a box of Kleenex was $1, made by England. Now when they go to the store, all they know is the price of Kleenexes has doubled to $2. Sure, it's an American product, but who cares? That's them way up there, those Northerners. So all the South sees is this tariff has drastically increased their prices. The South is overall a lot poorer than the North, all right? There are very rich plantation owners. The vast majority of people are not plantation owners, and they are poor workers. So the South is furious about this. Andrew Jackson's vice president is also simultaneously the governor of South Carolina, because back then you could have 2 separate jobs at the same time. Is this dude, a guy named John C. Calhoun, with his sweet neck beard. It's a style that I am not interested to see to come back. Anyway, John C. Calhoun is the vice president of Andrew Jackson. Now, Andrew Jackson is not a guy you play with, but John C. Calhoun is furious over this tariff. So much so, the Tariff of 1828 is not referred to as the Tariff of 1828 in the South. It is referred to as the Tariff of Abominations. Like the abominable snowman, meaning it's bad. So John C. Calhoun goes storming into Andrew Jackson's office, like kicks open the doors, and says, no. And Andrew Jackson looks up at him from his desk. He's like, what do you mean no? And John C. Calhoun's like, we're not paying it. The state of South Carolina will not pay this tax. So Andrew Jackson is not a dude you want to just bow up to. But John C. Calhoun here does. And Andrew Jackson says, you better watch your tone, boy. That's probably pretty close to what he said. Probably some expletives in there as well. And John C. Calhoun's like, no, you're going to stop this tariff. If you don't, and this is really important here, okay? So follow me, because it's the first time this really gets introduced. If you, meaning, this is John C. Calhoun telling Jackson, if you don't eliminate this tax from us, all right, either A, we, the South, has the right to nullify it or throw it out. And Andrew Jackson's like, you 100% do not have the right to nullify this. You have to pay the federal tax. This is what's important. Then John C. Calhoun says, all right, if you won't back down, we'll secede. Secede means South Carolina is threatening to leave America and become its own country. Now, obviously, the state can't physically move, but they can just say, we're no longer associated with the United States government. We're just going to be our own independent country of South Carolina. Now, the president's job, and this is important when we get to the Civil War, the president's job is to protect the Union, keep America together. That is his job. You basically are just challenging Andrew Jackson on his job. Andrew Jackson's response to this, of being insulted by this, is to tell John C. Calhoun, sure, go ahead and do that. Do it. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead and secede from the United States. John C. Calhoun gets called off guard. He's like, well, I'll do it. And Andrew Jackson's like, sure, go ahead and do it. And here's what's going to happen. The first day you become your own country, I'm going to have 100,000 men in South Carolina in a matter of weeks. This is him saying this. He says, I will have them in Charlotte. The day you secede, we'll train them. We will march into South Carolina. We'll march right to the Capitol. We'll go directly in there and find all these traitors, and we'll execute every one of them. We'll then find their leader, which is you, John C. Calhoun, and I'm personally going to be there to drag you outside, and I will hang you from the first tree in the front. Your body will hang there for a week. Let everybody see it. Then what we will do is we'll have a new government voted on, and the first vote that they will vote on is to rejoin the United States. The second thing they're going to do is they're going to pay this daggone tax. John C. Calhoun is terrified. In history books, it says they compromise. Here's what the compromise is. John C. Calhoun says, I'm sorry, please don't murder me, all right? And if you don't murder me, I will pay this tax. That is literally the compromise. I mean, and Andrew Jackson is not playing. He probably would have enjoyed to do this. So much so, a couple years later, because he's going to serve 2 terms, very popular among the people. This is one of his last quotes. He says, after 8 years as president, I have only 2 regrets: that I have not shot Henry Clay, who was one of the people with the great compromise, one of the reasons he didn't win it in 1824, that we can't really talk about in depth in this course, or hanged John C. Calhoun. He's like, I should just killed him anyway. But the Tariff of Abominations, it's very important to point out that the president, while he is from the South, actually created this tariff to benefit the North as well. So he is looking out for the best interest of both sides. So the question here is, explain the controversy around the Tariff of Abominations and what the eventual compromise became between the 2 sides. So the main thing is explain the issues surrounding the Tariff of Abominations and basically how it turned out. So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. So if you remember the National Bank, this was Andrew Jackson, Thomas Jefferson argued over it. This is, I guess the reason this is so historically significant is we do not have a national bank today, all right? The bank gets a charter for a certain amount of time, all right, that it's going to last, and then Congress has to keep approving it. We don't have a national bank today because it basically ceases to exist in its second iteration. It's called the Second National Bank of the United States. Thomas Jefferson got rid of it, and then James Madison brings it back immediately after Thomas Jefferson, even though he was a follower of Thomas Jefferson. Because Thomas Jefferson, all of a sudden, all his ideals kind of got thrown out the window when he became the president, and they thought it was a good idea to bring the national bank back. So Jackson has a big issue with the national bank. Jackson says the national bank only benefits Northerners because they're the only ones that are allowed to take loans out. And it only helps rich people get richer. The national bank, was very critical. It would not give loans to people in the South, to poor people, because they didn't think they could pay their loans back. There's actually, and this was kind of surprising when I learned this, there's actually no federal oversight, even though the bank is run with taxpayer money. There's no federal oversight. Andrew Jackson does not like it. He thinks it unfairly helps out rich people and the industrialists in the North, people he doesn't like, and negatively impacts people in the South who can't compete with the Northerners because they can get loans, and then the Southerners aren't allowed to get loans because they don't have high enough credit scores. So Andrew Jackson tries to cancel the national bank while he is in office. is a battle with him in Congress. Congress likes the national bank. Against his wishes, Congress continues the existence of the national bank. All right, and they basically override his veto. They do everything they can. They're like, you can't do nothing about it, Andrew Jackson. We're tired of you bullying us. We're going to keep the national bank. And Andrew Jackson says, oh, you are you? All right, fine. So even though they control the national bank, he actually controls the money in it. Andrew Jackson withdraws all the money out of the national bank. Just says, I withdraw all of it. It's taxpayer money. And then he's going to deposit it into these smaller banks all in the South. So the more money a bank has, the more powerful it has. He's not stealing any of the taxpayer money or anything. He's just storing it in other places. When he takes all the money out of the federal bank, the second national bank, banks can't exist. And by doing so, he effectively shuts down the bank and makes it collapse. Even though he couldn't legally shut it down with paperwork, he just took all the money out. Banks can't operate without money, and he is able to shut down the second national bank. And because of that, we never go back to having a national bank. So the question here is, explain why Jackson disliked the second national bank and how he was able to shut it down without congressional approval. All right, this is the really messed up thing Andrew Jackson does. That is just, it's shockingly and it's awful present day. It actually doesn't even take that long to talk about because it's so straightforward and awful. Andrew Jackson sees in the South there's a bunch of land he would like settlers to live on in areas such as Georgia. All right, so Jackson passes this bill called the Indian Removal Act. The entire point of the Indian Removal Act is exactly what it sounds like. Force Indians off their lands so that white Americans can go live on their land now. That's what it is. So this gets passed, and the military goes down, and all these different lines are different groups of Native Americans that are forced off their land and get moved west, places like Oklahoma, on foot. The Army goes down, rounds up these groups of Native Americans and forces them to walk for 1,000 miles with no rest. This is men, women, children, old people. 1 out of 4 of the Native Americans die when this happens. It is an absolute, and this wasn't shocking. People knew this was going to be the result of forcing all these Native people at gunpoint off their land. There are multiple wars that happen here with the Indians trying to fight back. It's an absolute slaughter by the United States military. So most Indians realized they could not physically fight back. However, they do sue the United States government, and this is the one that's so crazy to me. The Indians sue the government, and it goes all the way to the Supreme Court because they say we shouldn't have to leave. Now, Supreme Court justices are there for life. They were not appointed by Andrew Jackson. They're not afraid to stand up next to Andrew Jackson. John Marshall is still here. This original Supreme Court justice that expands the strength of the federal government, it goes all the way to John Marshall and the Marshall Supreme Court. And John Marshall says, you know what, Native Americans, you're right. You don't have to move. This is illegal, and you do not have to do it. Andrew Jackson, you need to stop. When Andrew Jackson hears that John Marshall has told him he is not allowed to continue to do this, his response, and this is public, it's not secret, this is public, he's like, oh, John Marshall says I can't move these Native Americans. Oh, okay, he says it's illegal and against the law. Okay. Does he have any guns? He doesn't have any guns. I'm the commander-in-chief. I have all the guns in the military, so I can do whatever I want. So, sorry, keep on walking. Andrew Jackson is solely responsible for the trail that continues on until his predecessor, also Martin Van Buren, as well, but it takes over 2 different administrations to do this. But it is absolutely crazy that he directly breaks a law and disobeys a direct order from the Supreme Court with an interpretation of the Constitution saying the Indian Removal Act is unconstitutional. This is how you get impeached, which means you get put on trial for breaking the law and kicked out of office. This is what should have happened to Andrew Jackson, but he doesn't. Nothing bad happens to Andrew Jackson. How can Andrew Jackson break the law and not have negative consequences to it? Here's how. the American people supported this. If you're the president and you have overwhelming public support, it is really hard to hold you accountable in the eyes of the public if they support you, whether or not what you're doing is illegal or not. And it's one of the scary parts of having a democratic republic that if you have support, you can break the Constitution and not suffer any consequences. And that's exactly what happens with Andrew Jackson. So looking back on it today, we are horrified by the Trail of Tears, but we also understand that at the time it was supported, which makes it even more awful at the time. This is one of the reasons why when I see Donald Trump had the picture of Andrew Jackson hanging behind him, I'm like, that's probably, like there's definitely some skeletons in that closet he might not be aware of. Anyway, the question here is, why was Andrew Jackson not punished though he blatantly broke the law when he refused to follow the Supreme Court's ruling on the Indian Removal Act? So pause me, answer that completely, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.